Yeah, place names are interesting. To put this kind of in context, we use it in geographical information services. We have a technology that allows us to do predictive modeling. And when you're doing predictive modeling, you're kind of putting data into a computer and you're trying to understand where Mi'kmaq people lived on the land. You might look at rivers, um, terraces, slope of land, all these kind of factors that are variable kind of factors. And you try to predict where Mi'kmaq people would have lived, like I say, thousands of years ago. But Mi'kmaq people have done that for us already 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago with language. It's a verb based language and it's a descriptive language, and the language will describe events and activity that are happening on the landscape. So they will say, for example, you'll hear the word today like trackety. Speaking of trackety, Annikanish, for example. And trackety is a Mi'kmaq word that's been anglicized and simplified, but the meaning, the old Mi'kmaq meaning of that word is encampment. So they're telling you where they would have camped. They have names for Halifax here is a good example. Jabukduk. They're talking about the Great Harbor, and that's one of the defining kind of characteristics of the Halifax HRM or the Halifax Dartmouth area is this huge harbor that extends into Bedford. Now, the Citadel, the land portion of Halifax, the Mi'kmaq word for that would have been stand of big pines. Because if you travel around the landscape you look at, you'll find this is Drumlin Hill over here at the Citadel. Very sandy, very fertile. So pines are going to grow in those kind of soils. And so the language tells us a lot about Mi'kmaq people, where they fished, where they would have hunted, where they would have gathered eggs, their portages, their you look at their legends, for example, and their legends are interesting because they're used to teach. A good example of a legend would be the beaver, the whale, and Glooscap, where the beaver built a dam across the Bay of Fundy from Blomaton to Parsboro. And as the legend has it, he hoarded water. Glooscap visited with the beaver and kind of tried to negotiate a removal of this dam, but the beaver would have none of it. So Glooscap sought the help of the whale to negotiate again the removal of this dam. The beaver stood his ground and said, "No, I'm not going to not going to remove this dam." So the whale, in turn, slapped the dam with its tail and broke the dam. Now that's a legend. That's a simplified version of that legend. And I remember hearing that story when I was a little boy. But when they were doing work in the Bay of Fundy, they had to do geological work on the floor of the bay. And as a result of that work, scientists, geologists discovered that about 6,000 years ago, there was in fact a ridge extended from Blomaton to Parsboro, and that natural ridge landscape feature itself was the dam. And as a result of geological activity and movement of the plates at the bottom of the bay, that ridge collapsed, allowing for the highest tides in the world now that we experience in the Minas Basin. And they just discovered this scientific fact out 6, 7 years ago. But this legend persisted. So you see now scientists, teachers, academics are now looking closely at these legends now because the culture being an oral culture and the transmission of history and facts is through story. Now, this is a good example of it. So, somewhere back about 6,000 years ago, a Mi'kmaq person would have witnessed the collapse of that ridge and the creation of the highest tides in the world, and would have passed that down for generation and generation and generation, and we still have access to it today. Some legends are, we have, when we travel around in our cars, we have a little square box on our dash, a GPS system, the geographical positioning system, that will tell us where we are, say in the city of Halifax. And now Mi'kmaq people wouldn't have had that technology, but they would have had stories and legends that would have been mental maps, and they would describe movement across from the Atlantic to the Bay of Fundy, for example. And there's one story of Kipsuganow, who was a young Mi'kmaq boy who traveled from the Atlantic side to Bloomington to speak with Glooscap. But he's describing his journeys where he's in a riverine environment, then he gets into the interior, he's encountering animals, some are friends, some are not so friendly. But if you really follow this story, you'll see he's describing different habitats in the province of Nova Scotia, different types of animals, different types of trees, and like I say, these are mental maps. So there's a lot that we don't consider, and we all unfairly tag Mi'kmaq people as being kind of prehistoric or like the dinosaur. And what's incredible is they're still here. They're still resilient. And we look at Mi'kmaq artwork, for instance, and young Mi'kmaq artists have not ever forgot their old traditional artistic teachings, really. So these new artisans, they're incorporating old practices into new contemporary styles and materials, and their work stays distinctively Mi'kmaq. And that's the beauty of the culture.